DeoShree and Areeba on impact of binge watching on brain and neurotransmitters. Over to you, team.
Good morning, everyone. Today, me and Areeba will be explaining this topic and taking you on a little bit of a deep dive. But before we start, I would like to ask everybody who else binge watches, including me. Yes, so we see a lot of raise of hands. So I'll ask the question: ever gotten stuck in a show, promising yourself just one more episode, only to realize that hours and hours have flown by and you're knee deep in another season? You're not done. Binge watching has now become a modern pastime, but what happens when just one more episode loop gets stuck on repeat? Buckle up because we are going to dive in on our brain on the binge watching adventure and explore how screen time marathon impacts our neurotransmitters and, well, our ability to resist hitting the next episode. Next slide. So, binge watching can be explained as the act of consuming multiple episodes of a TV show or their similar content in one sitting. It has become a popular way of, especially with the rise of streaming services, and it can be a way to relax, unwind, and kind of disconnect from the responsibilities and worries of the world, which does have an impact on our mental health. Now, there's a good chance that you've spent the past streaming year more videos than ever before. In fact, there's a study, a market research done by Nielsen. You can see a little bit tidbits of those facts on the screen, where there has been a rise from 2019. About 80% of the viewers have increased binge watching in 2020. Now, this can be also seen in an impact of the COVID wave that we had seen, but the study really told us about the mechanisms as watching anything between 2 to 6 episodes was considered binge watching, and 80% of the adults were doing it, 1.9 being male, 2.6 being female. Now, 20% of these binge watchers experienced, you know, difficulties with eating and obesity, out of which 52% of the adults stayed overnight to do the binge watching series and the marathon, 90% of them being millennials and Gen Z, and 37% of them being Netflix subscriber. Who doesn't love a good Netflix series? So one of the defining characters of binge watching is the ability to experience a story without interruptions and delays. And instead of waiting for weeks in between, the viewers can watch consecutive episodes, allows them to become fully engrossed in the narrative, enhancing the emotional connection and experience with the character and storylines. So this is a sense of experience of relaxation, enjoyment, entertainment makes it a popular leisure activity in the modern times. Next slide, please. Now, just imagine your brain being a living room and picture yourself sitting in a cozy night of the TV and popcorn in hand. But instead of your favorite sitcom, you're flipping through the channels filled with dopamine fueled drama, cliffhanger comedies, and serotonin thrillers. That's the kind of what things that happen when you're binge watching a session. Let's grab the remote and explore how our brain reacts to this non-stop entertainment marathon. We'll see which channel gets switched on and the emotional volume as it gets cranked up. Why sometimes hitting next episodes feels eerily similar to reaching out for another handful of popcorn even when you're already stuffed. Now, binge watching efforts offers brain a potent cocktail of pleasure and reward. Each episode we finish triggers a release of neurotransmitter that is notoriously famous, known as the dopamine. This chemical gives a sense of satisfaction and reinforces the desire to continue watching. It's the same as the reward pathway addicted in addictive behaviors. Now, companies are notorious to use something we call as cliffhanger effect. These services strategically use plot twists to hook us in, make us yearn for what's next to come, and we are unresisted to hitting that next episode. Anticipation further stimulates the dopamine release, keeps us glued to the screen. Now, this glued to the screen also leads to a flow state and immersion state, not like the one you do when you're studying or when you're kind of into a project. This absorption is, seemingly leading to a melt away of time, and our critical thinking takes a back seat. So what's basically happening that we're entering a less analytical mode, leading to heightened emotional response but less critical engagement, which contributes to impulsivity. Also, something very important has been found, that there is a role of nucleus accumbens, the ground zero of pleasure neurons. This is a pathway which is playing a significant role in processing pleasure, motivation, and addiction. As we binge watch, this pathway is flooded with dopamine and such neurons, strengthening the association between behavior and feeling of that happiness. Now, which leads to cravings and compulsions. Over time, repeated exposure can create a brain wiring change, which we can start experiencing craving for more episodes like this and increase difficulty to resist the urge. Of course, this leads to reduced sensitivity and search for more. As your brain becomes desensitized, the dopamine rush is more and more needed, and the vicious cycle that we get caught in watching more and more episodes to get the same hit again. Next slide. Now, what you'll find is that there are two pathways, one being the dopamine and another being the serotonin. The mood stabilizer, it's a crucial neurotransmitter, plays a vital role in mood regulation, which basically is the well-being hormone and contributes to feeling of balance of emotions, then sleep regulation and appetite. While serotonin depletion is seen in constant exposure to screen time, it potentially leads to depletion of serotonin completely in the long run and contributes to mood swings, irritability, and depression in some individuals. The disrupted sleep wake cycle disrupts the production of serotonin, critically hitting the synthesis and creating a negative feedback loop with serotonin. So, it is definitely linked to mood regulation and well-being, and changes in such could lead to feelings of sadness or anxiety over time. Now, there's another notorious neurotransmitters that we are well aware of, known as the cortisol or the stress regulator. That this loop that we engage in prolonged sedentary behavior potentially increases the cortisol level, basically the stress hormone. This elevated level over time may contribute to stress related health issues and impact overall well-being. Now, another neurotransmitter we call as endorphins, or our naturally feel good chemicals. Excessive consumption of screen time may lead to desensitization of the same, which is essentially basically telling you that you'll get, feeling of sadness over time as these feel good chemicals reduce in your body. So just understanding how both neurotransmitter also lead to impact on other transmitters is important in this process. Next slide. Now, there's been a very interesting study and an advent, though there has not been causal connections made. It's still seen that binge watching has been associated to hippocampal atrophy, potentially impacting our memory functions in the long run, and also kind of leading to deficits over time, even creating structural changes. So, a 2017 study published in Frontiers in Human Science investigated the association between screen time and hippocampal volume in adolescents. It was found that higher screen time was correlated with smaller hippocampal volumes over time. However, authors did acknowledge the limitation and emphasize the need of longitudinal study to make and establish causality, if present any, but the correlation definitely was there. Another 2020 review in Brain Sciences examined the potential effect of this excessive screen time on brain. Now, review mentions that studies suggest the link between altered hippocampal function, again acknowledges the need for studying more. Now, this also leads to prefrontal cortex alterations, which is responsible basically for decision making and impulse control. Like I mentioned before, we may undergo alterations which leads us to a weakened state of cognitive control. So basically, we would be less likely to be taking decisions in a more stabilized headspace and would be giving way to impulsive behaviors. Now, there is also impact in gray matter and white matter. Just like in any addictive behavior, we've seen a prolonged exposure may impact the gray and white matter integrity in brain, and structural changes in these areas could affect the cognitive process, emotional regulation, and overall brain health. So now the verdict is that brain's binge watching experience is a roller coaster ride of neurotransmitters. What we've seen is that there is dopamine rush, there is feel good reward, and overindulgence that leaves us craving for more and struggling to unplug. The sleep cycle gets messed up, our social battery might run low, but hey, what's there? Why is there a presence of a season finale break, right? I think that can be a chance to recharge the remote, catch up on some real life episodes, and come back ready to face the next binge watching experience with refresh brain and healthy dose of self control. After all, moderation is the key. So, keeping the popcorn full bowl entertainment without giving your brain a sugar crash is important. Now, moving on to Ariba taking over, explaining more about the cognitive and emotional impacts and what we can do about it. Thank you.
Thank you, DeoShree. So let's discuss about the cognitive impacts of binge watching on our brains, right? Binge watching, particularly when individuals engage in prolonged viewing sessions, can have an adverse effect on executive functions such as planning, organizing, problem solving, and regulating attention. So, when immersed in a compelling narrative or series, individuals may find it challenging to disengage from the content and shift their attention to other tasks. This continuous exposure to captivating stimuli can divert cognitive resources away from essential responsibilities. For example, someone who binge watches a TV series into the late hours of the night may struggle to focus on work or academic tasks the following day due to the impaired executive function caused by sleep deprivation and distraction. Secondly, cognitive overload and information processing. So, binge watching can also contribute to cognitive overload. That means overwhelming the brain's capacity for information processing. Excessive consumption of media content for extended periods can inundate individuals with a vast amount of information, taxing cognitive resources. This cognitive overload can impair the brain's ability to efficiently process and retain information, leading to difficulties in memory consolidation, problem solving, and decision making. So, additionally, the rapid pace of media consumption during binge watching may not allow sufficient time for reflection or deep processing of information, which further hinders cognitive functioning. Let's talk about the emotional implications of binge watching. So, im- uh, binge watching is association with increased anxiety and depression, right? So particularly when binge watching is done for extended periods in a sedentary manner, it has been correlated with high levels of anxiety and depression. The act of binge watching involves sitting for long hours, often in isolation, which can have lead a feeling of loneliness and disconnection from reality. Additionally, the content being consumed may include themes of narratives that evoke strong emotional responses, such as stress, sadness, or fear. When individuals engage with such content intensely for a prolonged period without breaks, it can exacerbate existing feelings of anxiety or depression, or even contribute to their development over time. Furthermore, excessive binge watching may disrupt regular routines, sleep patterns, and social interactions, all of which are essentials for maintaining mental well being. Emotional desensitization. So, continuous exposure to intense or dramatic content, common in binge watching sessions, can lead to emotional desensitization. Initially, viewers may experience strong emotional reaction to the content, such as fear, sadness, or excitement. However, with repeated exposure to similar stimuli over time, the emotional response may diminish. And this desensitization occurs as the brain becomes accustomed to the emotional cues presented in the content, leading to reduced emotional responsiveness. As a result, individuals may find themselves less emotionally engaged or affected by real life events or stimuli that would typically evoke strong emotions. So, this desensitization can have implications for empathy, interpersonal relationships, and overall emotional well being. So, in summary, binge watching can have profound effects on brain, impacting neural reward systems, neurotransmitter levels, structure, and cognitive emotional functions. So, while moderate and mindful viewing may not pose significant risk, excessive binge watching can lead to various cognitive and emotional challenges. So, let's talk about certain therapeutic modalities that we can use while dealing with clients who are suffering with binge watching and have cause significant damage to their brains and their personal life, right? So we can use cognitive behavioral therapy, helping them identify and challenge their distorted thoughts and beliefs related to binge watching. Then we can help them develop a healthier coping mechanism for stress and boredom, and set realistic goals for managing screen time and creating a balanced lifestyle. Next, we can use mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness will help increase awareness in the present moment. And with meditating and breathing techniques, we can help the clients manage their impulse and reduce the urge of binge watching. With behavior activation, we can encourage alternate rewarding activities, and we can help them create a schedule that includes a variety of fulfilling activities, which reduces the time to binge watch. We can use graded exposure therapy to gradually reduce the time spent binge watching, which will help individuals adjust to a better and a healthier viewing pattern. And lastly, we can use habit reversal in identifying the triggers and replace them with healthier alternative behaviors to binge watching. And lastly, create a plan to interrupt the habit loop that can be substituted with positive activities. So that's mostly it, and we are not doing the Q&A, I believe. Or if she would like to go ahead with the Q&A.
Yeah, we would like to do the Q&A. So, just going to ask the team, what were the neurotransmitters impacted by binge watching if we were here and paying attention?
Hi, dopamine.
Yes, Chandra, you're on the right mark. Anybody else?
Serotonin.
Yes, Chatraniva, good. It's serotonin. And yeah, thank you, everyone. There were cortisol also, endorphins, and all of those cocktail of emotion, neurotransmitters. Now, something I would like to ask is what's the therapeutic modality that you would apply to a client showing symptoms of the same? You can, reinvent a therapeutic modality with the things that we discussed about, and which other clinical concern does binge watching resemble closely to, which will also help you create the therapeutic modality you're looking towards. Yes, Romana.
I think it is very closely related to addiction.
Yes, you're right on that mark. Any therapeutic modality that you would like to use from the given modalities?
I think CBT would work here,
Right,
and
you're on the
behavioral
right.
techniques.
Yeah, that's on the mark there. You can also use behavioral activation and other therapeutic modalities mentioned, but that's on the right mark when we're working with addictive behaviors. Okay, so thank you everyone on the team. And any other questions that anybody would like to ask from all of us, we are here to answer.
All right, thank you, team, for the informative presentation. Now that it is over, the team is available to answer some of your questions if you have any. You may raise your hand and ask, or drop your questions in the chat box. Meanwhile, I have a question, maybe more of a clarification question. So, when we talk about this binge watching mentality, which alters our reward pathways in the brain that you talked about, how does it influence the behavior? Precisely, for example, a person may show symptoms of mental exhaustion. What would be
Mhm.
other symptoms?
Right. Um, so when in concern to what you mentioned as the precursor in the question, that when reward pathways are activated, what happens is that there is a feedback loop that happens. So whenever we get rewarded feelings for any activity, we are usually likely to do it more. Just like in an addictive format, we would be more likely to engage it in that activity, even if it leads to emotional exhaustion and cognitive exhaustion. I'll say also happens along the line. There is a point where the cognitive modalities take a back seat. So what will happen is that over the time there will be an impact on decision making also, and you would be more likely to just given those feelings of impulsive behaviors rather than really thinking about what's going on and how we are processing things. Because when you're binge watching, you're immersed in the experience so much, and it's coming from a one-sided narrative that you're not engaging yourself in it. You're just a consumer and a viewer of it. So sometimes we can take a backseat. Also disrupts the sleep cycle, as we've seen that the binge watching happens during the night often, and even if it's not happening that way, you are exhausting yourself from constant viewing. So what will happen is that you'll either sleep quickly throughout the day in short spans, or you'll not sleep at all, and it will disrupt that serotonin system, like I mentioned in the research. Of course, dopamine is the main neurotransmitter hit in the reward pathway, so you will get desensitized to a lot of neurotransmitting activity, which basically means that you will need more and more of the same activity to get the rush of happiness, of the excitement, of the feeling of reward or excitement, just like Areeba also mentioned. Or those, even if you're watching a lot of gore and a lot of violent content, you might also get desensitized to that. So impact is very multifold, and what I can say is that even if it seems like very harmless, it's very insidious in its impacts. So there is behaviorally, what could happen is that you are disconnected from life and looking forward to only series. When you go back home, you are sitting in a position and following probably a sedentary lifestyle when you're in that zone. So there could be impacts on your eating habits and how you work throughout the day and the energy levels. So all of those things might show a hit in your behavioral aspect. I hope that answers the question. If anything's left, Areeba can take over.
I think you covered it well. In fact, like Romana was asking about basic symptoms and how it'll appear, you'll also see people typically maladjusted in their environment, not being able to do or meet their deadlines when it comes to professional deadlines. You'll have people who are already emotionally exhausted, or they're not willing to participate in their relationships around, right? So all of that is going to reflect on people eventually.
All right, thank you both of you. So to summarize, what I could learn here is that it would uh, disrupt the sleep cycle. There will be lack of concentration. There will be lack of decision making abilities and other cognitive abilities. There will be addiction and increased screen time. There will be isolation, sedentary lifestyle, and procrastination, etc. Right?
Absolutely, you
Yes.
summarized it perfectly.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Any other questions from the team? Yes, Abhishek, please ask.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the brief presentation, team. There is a link that I want to explore while you were presenting this presentation about binge watching. So it's about the basically about a disruption of the neural circuits or the neural pathways when we are binge watching. So so it's something that is it common because binge is something that is persistence. So in the work with the bipolar disorder persons, I have seen the flight of speech, and they persistently, constantly speak from morning to evening without stopping. So there is a structural problem in their brain. So and they if they involve in any activity, they will be they will be binging it, or they will be persistently doing it. So is there it if there is it because there is a structural change, who is watching the or who is binge watching or binge eating. So I'm asking that population who is suffering from binge eating, are they vulnerable to the bipolar disorder? Because that is
Mhm.
something where anatomy comes and brain structure comes. So yes.
Okay. From what I understand from your question, Abhishek, you're asking that does it lead to or is it concordant to bipolar disorder? Something we did mention when we were talking about the whole, impact on structure of the brain, and I think Reba had this majorly in her part, where there was a level of mood and emotional disruption, which can definitely lead to, like we said, feelings of depression and anxiety, and eventually lead to a level of mood dysregulation, but that has to be yet to be studied in a more effective way. Of course, like any addictive behavior, it has to be done to a level where there is a lot of lack of self control happening, and it's been going on for a while. That leads to then those disorders happening in your system. It is not the only reason, I'll say, but there is definitely a correlate when it's happening. Is that if you're indulging in the cycle, the serotonin is disrupted, which is one of the major also neurotransmitters in bipolar disorder that we're trying to work with. So I do think that there could be a connection happening or a correlation happening in that process. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes, it gives us the sight that you are thinking in the same direction. So yes, thank you for thinking.
Any other questions from the team? Okay, if no, we may end the presentation here. Thank you, team, for your presentation. Thank you, everyone, for participating.